Albara, I think your voice is you're on mute, so you want to unmute yourself.
Oh my God, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
Now we can.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you about that. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll start over. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Albara Abdul Karim. I will be the moderator for today. I'd like to start off by thanking all the speakers on behalf of the American Center for Justice team. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to sit with us to just dissect these intricate issues. I'd like to begin with self-introductions. Imam Dawood, can you please introduce yourself, brother?
Assalamu alaikum. As your brother Dawood Walid with you. I am the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and I am a member of the Michigan Muslim Imams Council. I'm also a senior fellow at the Auburn Seminary, which is based in New York City.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Dr. Khalid Al-Amiri, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Khalid Al-Amiri. I work for the city of New York for almost 20 years now. As a planner and a manager, I manage dozens of projects throughout the city with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Also been involved in community organizing. And I'm also a candidate for City Council in Queens, District 32.
Okay. Thank you for that. And last but not least, Mr. Adil Muazzib.
Thank you, Albara. Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. This is your brother, Adil Mazib. I work for Beaumont Health as a software developer. I also have my own startup to develop mobile apps and web applications. I've been in the community service arena for about a decade right now in Southeast Michigan, focusing on issues related to higher education. I'm currently a board member at the Dearborn Board of Education, and I enjoy being an active member in the community in the areas of education, social justice, and environmental justice. And I'm really excited for today's discussion.
Jazakallah khair, brother Adil. All right, thank you guys. Thank you all so much for that. Bismillah. Today's discussion will be about the Islamic and Arab American communities' perspective on the recent events that have taken place regarding racism and racism in the West in its totality. Inshallah, let us start with Imam Dawood. Imam, what is the best way for a Muslim individual to stand up against racism? And how can the Muslim community show their support for, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other victims of racism?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Thank you for the question. I'd say two things that come to my mind. I've been pondering this question and been involved in a lot of these discussions across America in the last couple of weeks. And I would say one is that in order to deal with any issue properly, that we should first have knowledge of the actual roots of the issues. Otherwise, we can get caught up in emotions and get caught up in trends and really deal with things in a very superficial level that in fact, maybe are just talking about incidents here or there or symptoms of problems and not really going to the roots of actually what is taking place. So I think that's the first thing. And in regards to what's been going on recently across America and George Floyd, I want to reiterate something around this point. And that is the issues of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the countless amount of these that have taken place over the decades in America. When people see things like this and not proper arrest, like no one's been arrested for Breonna Taylor's murder thus far in Louisville, Kentucky, or what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, the African-American jogger who got shot down and the prosecutors didn't do anything. And many people would say, well, the system's broken. And my response to that is no, the system in America is operating exactly as it was designed to operate as it relates to African Americans. That's the first thing we need to stop saying. The system's broken, system broken. System's not broken. Systemic racism in law enforcement has its roots in America going back to when there were overseers on plantations who had Africans enslaved, a large percentage of them Muslims, by the way, up to 30% of them Muslimin, and the overseers became officers. And our law enforcement procedures from the very beginning is based upon this particular control of being more concerned about landowners' property, because Black people were property, right, than actual people. So once we get this straight, this is just one example, then perhaps we'll begin to look at things differently than just these isolated things, say, oh, system's broken, system's broken. No, system's not broken. This is the first thing. The second thing is helping. I would say that it is important for Muslims in America, and I think most people on here are Yemeni, to begin to develop real interpersonal relationships and take counsel from your African American brothers and sisters in Islam. And it is improper adab to jump over people in your own community and try to have Black solidarity and partner with Black Lives Matter when you haven't even taken the time to cultivate real interpersonal relationships with your fellow brothers and sisters in Islam and take their shura on how to proceed. It's not proper adab. It's not what, it's not wala as it's defined in Islam. So you don't jump over your brothers and sisters in Islam to jump to some people in Black Lives Matter, in which some of their solutions may actually go against the Quran and the Sunnah. How many African Americans don't agree with all of their platform or all their tactics. So I think some of these are very foundational things. Marching and protesting is good. Calling Congress people are good, but the internal work inside the Muslim community, I believe this is the long-term gain that will help deal with the issue better. Because eventually these protests are going to fizzle out. Then what, right? But the long-term work that needs to be done inside the Muslim community to build like some more political education, which then that's how we build more political power. It starts with that first piece. So that's my advice, and Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair, brother Dawood Walid. Okay, Mr. Adil, sorry, Dr. Khalid Al-Amiri. What do you think the youth can do to get more involved with bringing about the betterment of the system, the Muslim community itself regarding these issues?
Well, I agree with the Imam that getting Muslim to talk about racism is a huge start. In New York City, about a decade ago, we had an election for the Yemeni community, and we mapped out where the Yemenis live. And apparently more than 90% of them, we had about 4,000 people that were surveyed, live in Black community, which tells you that there's a strong interaction between the Black and the Yemeni communities. Now, what action needs to be, there's a lot of action actually that we're doing in New York City. We're reflecting of what's going on. And in my own community, we've been having a lot of Zoom calls, discussion what racism is, how to deal with it, how to become supportive in our organization to the Black American community. Last week, we put together, and I'm talking about the youth, not me, but the youth put together a rally in Harlem, New York, in support of the Black community, which is a good gesture. Today, they are starting a program where they paint Black Lives Matters in their own stores to show that there's a strong support and they're willing to sacrifice. And see, racism is not just a problem with the police department, and maybe in New York, and I'm talking about New York City. It's throughout the nation. It's every city agency. I've been working for New York City for more than 20 years, and racism is it's a setup. It's a program that is set up. If a black person applies for a job, they put a lot of hurdle in front of him or her. Qualification, seniorities, and all these. But if a white person needs a job, the hurdles are not there. So if you look at the pyramid of employments for any city agency, you see the bottom of the pyramids mostly black, which satisfy diversity, and in the upper management, middle management, more than 90% white. And with this, it's not about policing. Policing is an issue that it's on the surface. It is going to be taken care of, but we need to work harder at the big picture. And when we look at the big picture in New York City, the New York City Fire Department, 95% of firefighters are white. Now, that doesn't say that black are not qualified, but they are actually more qualified because they're as qualified. They were born and raised here. They have the education. So the systematic racism have to start to be talked internally. And when we do that, then we move forward and talk to other races. But I'm happy that the Yemeni Americans are discussing it internally. The Muslim community, I've been having many discussions with the Bengali communities, and they are reflecting that they need to be there, and they made a lot of mistakes. We all made a lot of mistakes in the past, ignoring the black, but things are changing. It's a big battle. We have a long way to go, but it's a good start.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. Actually, Mr. Abdullah Hamoud just joined us, so I'd like to take some time for him to introduce himself so we could get him to be part of this discussion, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be here. Thank you for the organization for hosting this conversation. My name is Abdullah Hamoud, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of serving as the state representative for the city of Dearborn. So happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamoud. A few minutes ago, Imam Dawood actually brought up systematic and institutionalized racism. So I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, from the legal perspective, are there any policies we need to change, and how can we, from the Dearborn community, how do we better understand systematic and institutionalized racism?
Thank you for the question. First and foremost, it's great to be with you all, and let me firstly say that it's great to see Sheikh Dawood Walid with us, and his voice is the most important in this conversation. And so I certainly hope we allocate the appropriate time to him, because as a Black Muslim within our community, I think he can speak to these issues far better than any of us can. It's important that we oftentimes take a step back, which the Muslim community, the Arab Muslim community, sometimes it's a difficult time in doing, and actually listen to our brothers and sisters in Islam. So let me begin there. To your question about the systemic racism that we see, Sheikh Dawood nailed it on the head. Police brutality is but one tentacle of a system that systemically oppresses Black Americans on a day-to-day basis. And it's not because the system is not working or malfunctioning. It is because the system was built and is operating in the way that it was intended to. It's important to indicate that when we speak to George Floyd, when we speak to Breonna Taylor, when we speak to Ahmaud Arbery, these are instances. The topic at hand is generational. If we lend our ears to our Black sisters and brothers, we would hear the conversations that Black mothers and Black fathers have been having with their Black sons and daughters about what it means to be Black in America. This is generational, and it's extremely important that we understand that. So when you talk about what policies we can push forward, what we can advocate for, it's difficult to advocate for a policy within a corrupt system. Simply changing one policy is not going to bring down a whole system. That's why we have to really think outside the box and ask ourselves, how can we construct new systems that actually deliver equity and justice in the way that we wish to, that we intended to do? And so that's the conversation that I think we can be having. When we speak to, systemic racism, there are so many issues, and I said police brutality is but one tentacle. If we look to the south end of the Dearborn community that borders the southwest of Detroit, environmental injustice is another one of those tentacles. And in order to, redesign our environmental health system, it's not about enacting one policy. It's about deconstructing what the current agency is doing and propping up a consumer protection agency that looks out for Black lives and immigrant lives and so on and so forth. So I think that's the lens that we have to have. And as Muslims, first and foremost, I think it's important that we look introspectively, that we begin with our families and with our friends. And there are small things that we can begin to do within our own household that will have long-lasting impact. For example, the often accepted usage of the verbiage habid and habit. That is something that we within our families and conversation think may be permissible to use, but wholeheartedly is vile and wrong. And we have to first call that out within our own households, within our own families, within our own social groups, and make sure that whenever it happens, we speak out, because that within itself is also a form of racism here within the Muslim community, with the Arab community specifically. Secondly, to Sheikh Dawood's points, is also asking ourselves, how often do we reach out to our Black Muslim sisters and brothers within our community for interfaith dialogues, for dialogues? How many Black Muslims do we have within our masajid? And what roles do they have within those masajid? So I think there are many ways and many lenses that we really need to evaluate in order for us to get into a path where we first address the racism within our own community and then begin to address it at a much larger level.
MashaAllah, thank you so much, Brother Abdullah. I want to go back to Imam Dawood. I want you to address something Abdullah said, which he stated, how can we bring about a new system? So I wanted your input on that. How do you think we can even begin bringing about a new system? He also mentioned, implementing new principles within ourselves, within our own communities, so that we can start from the bottom up.
Well, I think a lot of it goes back, before we go into the intricacies of shifting, of basically deconstructing systems to build new ones. It goes back to my first point about political education, and actually knowing the roots of this country, and actually the reality of how this country was established, and how those systems were built, and then what are the impacts that they have on all facets of life. Once we see how these things were built and the impact that they have now, then we can go about the proper redress, right? So I think it all goes back to education, and much of this has to do with demystifying the myth of America, right? And I mention this all the time, especially for immigrant communities, because people think that they come to America and this is the land of opportunity. But as Malcolm X famously said, that for Black people, the American dream for other people is the American nightmare for us. The American dream for many people, including many immigrants that come here, is the American nightmare for Black people. So in these systems, we have to also see how we have been complicit in benefiting from systems that have systematically kept Native American people at Black Americans at the very bottom, right? And it's by design, as a state rep Abdullah says. So I think that much of this starts back off with our actually knowing about this country, and like some real deep-rooted political education outside of the myth of America, right? Because much of what we operate upon in our dealings is really, a lot of it is like middle-class respectability politics, just to be frank. Like a lot of our political engagements in photo ops with certain law enforcement people and elected officials, it's not about principles or knowing things. A lot of it is middle-class respectability, so that Muslims can be perceived as a safe group with the dominant class, the dominant culture. And so if that's the perspective we're operating from, then we can't shift or change any systems if we're operating from that perspective, right? So that's where I think the key is. And again, we're talking about 400 years of embedded systems in America. So it can't be changed at the snap of a finger. We're talking 400 years, 400 years of things that have been established in America. So it just can't be changed with a couple of legislations or even in one generation, right? We're talking about, this is the race of the tortoise, not of the hare, as the saying goes.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Dawood. Mr. Adil, I wanted your perspective on how we can enhance and improve the educational system to provide better equality to all people, maybe even slowly introducing, the discussion of bringing about a new system to, the educational system as a whole.
Well, thank you for the question. And before I answer your question, I'd like to echo Representative Hamoud's words about the importance of having voices like Imam Walid and this conversation to learn and to listen. I think it's very, very crucial of Arab Americans, especially Yemeni Americans right now, to listen to Black Muslims and to get their direction on how do we handle Black Lives Matter? How do we become in solidarity? And what are the things that we should be doing? We should be looking for their direction, and we should be on the listening and on the action part. And I salute all the people in New York who are doing amazing things where the Yemeni American community is standing in solidarity with Black Lives Matter movement. As the Black Americans also have stood in solidarity with Muslims, with Arab Americans when there are unjust things that happened. I remember back to when this Muslim ban happened, when we had the demonstration, a walk from Masjid Dix all the way to Patton Park with the African and Latino American community. So this is the time of making sure that we join forces together in order to achieve justice. And achieving justice, it's not going to happen in a snap of fingers, as Imam Walid said. It's a lot of things that we have to do on the ground in order to achieve justice. And it's a very complex situation right now. And the relationships between the Yemeni American community, the Arab American community, and the Black American community has been always on mutual respect, I think, for the most part. Unfortunately, there are voices within our community which are on the other side, and I find that truly surprising. I want to answer your question right now as far as education, and it's at the heart of everything. Because I think if every kid in America gets the same opportunity and gets the same shot, we would not have these inequalities and we would not have these problems that are occurring. In order to achieve the American dream, as they say, you need to have a quality education. And if you're living in Detroit, in West Detroit, opposed to Bloomfield or Dearborn, and they have that privilege of achieving that dream, the opportunities are not equal. They're simply not there. They're virtually not there. And it's because where you live. And the system is determined to group the so-called poor people together. And unfortunately, we have that disparity as far as opportunities, as far as things once you get to the jobs, because by the time people get to the jobs, it's already too late. You're already way too advanced than I am. So how do we make sure that we get to a situation where there is an equitable amount of resources distributed among these communities? And equity is achieved when people work together for a win-win situation. Equity is something that is hailed to be a tool for achieving happiness in communities. If there are resources available to those who are disadvantaged, who are marginalized, we're gonna get to that level. Now, if you're gonna say everybody gets the same fair share, everybody gets the same amount of resources, that's not gonna help. That's never gonna help. So I think it starts with resources. Education has to change as far as curriculum and teaching history from the the lens of the marginalized as well, to bring those speakers. When I went to high school, learning about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King probably were just like 2 pages, 3 classes, 4 classes, 4 lectures. We need more of that. We need to really learn from those movements. We need to really look at history and not be a judge of it, but rather be a student and learn more about what has happened so these things would not be repeated.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Adil. Mr. Hamoud, do you still have time to answer one more question?
Yes.
Okay. I've actually come across personally some people telling me that the racism that we see nowadays, it's not as bad anymore. What do you say to those people that bring that up?
First and foremost, allow me to, there's many types of racism. And so if we're talking about racism towards Black Americans, I'm not the best individual to answer that question, and would defer that question to some of our Black sisters and brothers. But if you look at every measure of data, racism is actually proliferating. Racism, there are more hate crimes now, than there were in the post 9/11 era. Additionally, I think when it's also important for us to speak to, what happened to George Floyd, what happened most recently in Atlanta, what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. These murders were always occurring. It is just now with the evolution of technology that we're simply just capturing the footage with cell phones that are in our pockets, and thus the world is able to see it, but it's always been happening. So I wouldn't agree with the notion that in some way or shape or form that racism is decreasing. Rather, the inequities are actually growing. If you look at every measure of wealth, if you look at the inequities amongst the low and poor working class with those of the elite, that inequity is growing. If you look at opportunities for Black Americans or Brown Americans relative to white counterparts, that inequity is growing. So, if you utilize every single measure that we have, in no way, shape, or form has racism ceased. Rather, as Chef Dawood spoke to earlier, the system is working as it was intended to. And it will continue to until we educate ourselves and identify a pathway forward, which will take generations. And I think, to his point as well, it starts with us educating ourselves. I mean, how many of us can speak to, Black Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, aside from Bilal, who everyone likes to default to? Put the mu'adhan aside from Bilal, can anybody name a few more, a handful more? And there are several. If you look to many of the imams married women of African tribes, and generation after generation, most of our, the imams within Ahl al-Bayt are majority African, actually, as opposed to Arab or Middle Eastern. So I think we have to educate ourselves also, as Muslims, it's our duty to educate ourselves, to inform ourselves of the Sahaba, so that we can speak from a historical perspective, so that we can understand from that historical perspective. But I do not believe that racism has subsided. I think we have somebody in the White House who enables, who emboldens what's always been there. I think what we've seen is actually a removal of the veil that many have refused to actually come face to face with. And the video of the murder of George Floyd really sparked what I hope to be a sustainable movement. And in my travels, I was able to visit Montgomery. And in Montgomery, I was reminded that the Montgomery bus strikes lasted for longer than 1 year. And it lasted for longer than 1 year. It wasn't until after that point in which the reforms were made and changes were made about who can sit where on the buses. And that's the type of persistence, that's the type of sustainability that we need. It must be long lasting. If we simply protest one time, go home, pat ourselves on the back, no change will come out. Last week there was a march in Dearborn, and it was, Dearborn for Black Lives. There was a march, there was 300 people. Today there was another march, there was 50 people. If next week there's another march, how many people are going to show up there? And so unless we have sustainability, unless we have clear action, clear steps, and an agenda that we can all agree on, as well as Muslim Americans. We won't make any change.
MashaAllah, perfect answer. Thank you so much, Brother Abdullah Hamoud. I'm gonna go back to Imam Dawood. We've talked a lot about education so far, alhamdulillah. So I wanted to see, if you could give us some Islamic examples and principles that we can implement in our daily lives, inshallah, regarding this topic.
Okay, so there are different types of racism. There's individual acts of racism, there's structural racism or systemic racism. There's also things called cultural racism. But I think it's important for us from an Islamic perspective that we try to isolate that these outward manifestations are based in metaphysical realities or spiritual diseases. So for every physical manifestation of racism, there is a spiritual disease that undermines it. And the primary spiritual disease that we have to look at and be on guard for is the spiritual disease of kibr. Because this is, if we are to say that Iblis is the imam of the racists, and Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said this, Iblis is imam al-muta'assibin wa salaf al-mustakbirin, is what he said. Iblis made the statement, قَالَ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِنْ نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ طِينٍ, right? He said he was better than Adam, and he talked about specifically what he was made of and his outward appearance, right? So this is at the roots of racism, is the spiritual disease of kibr. So then there needs to be remedies that are put forth to help with human hearts from healing from kibr, moving to the praiseworthy trait of tawadu', or having humility with other people, right? And that's a long conversation, but many scholars, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah wrote a very nice book about the remedies to spiritual diseases, so I won't go into that. You can look that up. The other thing is that I mentioned the issue of ignorance, and we can be sincere and be sincerely wrong, right? And we can be ignorant of other people and not necessarily have a malicious intention. So it can still have a negative impact on people. But your intention wasn't malicious, but you could still hurt someone. It's kind of like if one of us were in a car accident and we accidentally lost control of our car, but we ran over and killed someone, whether we meant to or not, the person's dead nonetheless, right? So this is why Allah Azza wa Jal tells us in the Quran that he created us in different nations and tribes, li ta'arafu, that we may get to know one another. And this knowledge that we have of other people can only come about through, firstly, these one-on-one interpersonal relationships, interactions that helps get rid of the ignorance. Because this is what the Sahaba did when they migrated from Mecca to Medina, in different Sahaba from different backgrounds, Ethiopian, Nubian, Persian. They all got together with Qahtani Arabs and Adnani Arabs, and they created this beautiful inter-tribal, interracial society in Medina in the time of the Prophet, alayhi salam, right? And then the other thing is that we read information and learn about each other's histories, right? And for Black Americans, our history didn't start as being enslaved in America. We have a history and a culture and civilization that was great going back to West Africa, of the Khilafah of Sokoto in Nigeria, and Mansa Musa and the Malian Empire and the Ghanaian Empire. And we have Qaba'il, we have culture and different things that the British tried to strip us from everything. They didn't strip us from everything, but we had a history and culture and Islam before we were brought here against our will as slaves. So this is very important to understand as well.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Dawood. Dr. Khalid, unfortunately, we've seen in New York and other major cities, with all the protesting and stuff, there's also been, you know, looters who don't necessarily represent the movement itself. So, and a big, you know, a community that's been a victim to this is, you know, specifically the Yemeni American community. You know, we see videos of the Yemeni Americans trying to protect their stores and stuff like that. So how should we respond to something like that?
Well, as I said earlier, a lot of the stores, Yemeni stores, are located in mostly Black neighborhood. But you need to look at how city is planned. City is planned is, and you know, you'll know in any city that you go, you know, the Black neighborhood, the white neighborhood, the intermixed neighborhood. And again, this was designed intentionally to keep the elite away from the poor and the poor to stay poor. Now, a lot of the rioters were not only people from the community, but also Hispanic, they were white, and they were incitement actually began by the police themselves because they wanted to kind of perceive that these were criminals, and President Trump continued to say that, you know, that they're criminals, and again, and you've seen a lot of videos that the police will incite violence, and then it began, and then it's just continues. But what happened in New York City is that they took steps to stop the riots, and actually Black Lives Matter staff, whenever there's rallies or demonstration, what they do is they protect stores from the whites. So it's not that the Black are angry and they go out there and destroy property, because at the end of the day, they look bad. But what they did is that they have a lot of volunteers now, and they go to these small stores and they protect them from any rioters or people trying to create problem. But a lot of it is really incited by the police and by the haters that just don't want this thing to end.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. Did anyone want to add anything onto that?
I'd like to add one thing, a huge misunderstanding between the Yemeni businesses and the Black community. I think the Yemeni businesses recognize the Black community or their customers, their main customers. And they, for the most part, there is a huge respect. There are, unfortunately, some events, this is prior to these events, where people get shot in those places. And it's a huge problem, and people just try to incite this to be Arab versus Black or Yemeni versus Black, when in reality, it's how the system is made, why people resort to violence, why people resort to robbery in the first place. And it's like trying to treat the system without not trying to fix the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is that poverty is a huge problem, and it needs to be confronted with making sure that people are pulled out of poverty, that they are given the resources, they're given the opportunities, that the playing level field, when they say there's a leveled field as far as opportunities in America, we have to get to that point in order for crimes to be extended, for people to have the same amount of opportunities. We'll never get to be equal. Well, I'm not saying there's going to be that rosy world and utopia of having a land of no problems, no issues. But in order to get to a point where you have a level playing field, resources and equities and representation of people of color needs to be acknowledged. I also want to bring that point back that Abdullah Hamoud started with, and I hope that if this movement have taught us anything, is the casual racism that exists in the Arab and Yemeni community when you refer to Black people. And I'm hoping that we will never hear that word again. I honestly don't like to mention it at all, but the word abd, which means slave, and people say, oh, kullina ibadullah, we're all slaves of Allah. No, that's not what you mean. And many people, I've been correcting my family, my friends, all the time when they say that word. And we sometimes get into arguments where because of the usage. And that needs to be really buried down, and to recognize that that word is offensive, must never be repeated, must never be acknowledged. And you're in itself, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu once said, متى استعبدتم الناس وقد ولدتهم أمهاتهم أحرارا. When you have enslaved people, when their mothers have gave birth to them when they're free. So it's very important that we, the youth, and this is a message to all of the youth and to all of the elders too, to completely eradicate that word from our dictionary, from our conversations. I think that's the first step for us as society. Sorry for taking long. And
no problem at all. Thank you so much, Mr. Adil. Before we start moving on to promoting certain things, I wanted to ask Imam Dawood Walid one more question. I would really appreciate if you educate our audience on Black significance in Islamic history. I know this is a topic that can take on, a long time, but like Brother Abdullah Hamoud mentioned before, people usually just mention Bilal ibn Rabah, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. I want to know more Islamic Black figures in history. So could you give us your input, inshallah?
Yeah, this is a very huge topic, so I will mention one person just as a reminder, but I would say that you can Google this book, look it up online. It's on PDF file, or you can order it. And it's written by Ibn Jawzi al-Hanbali. Ibn al-Jawzi al-Hanbali, rahmatullahi alayhi. He wrote a book called Tanwir al-Ghabish fi Fadl Sudan wal-Habash. Tanwir al-Ghabish fi Fadl Sudan wal-Habash. And it is a book that he wrote. Jalaluddin as-Suyuti wrote a similar book as well, called Rafu Shan al-Hubshan. But these are books that these great scholars wrote specifically about Black people who were Muslims from the Salaf. So one of these people I just will mention very briefly, there was a woman who was present at the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and her name is Baraka radhiyallahu anha. Baraka. He's also later became known as Ayman. Ayman, she was present at the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then when his mother Amina became ill, Baraka actually looked after and helped raise the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for a period of time, looked after him. And it is narrated that the Prophet alayhi salam said about this Black woman, this Habashiyah, she's Habashiyah. He said about her, Ayman ummi ba'da ummi. Ayman ummi ba'da ummi. So our beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he was taken care of and was suckled by a Black woman, and then he said that Ayman is the mother after my blood mother. So this is a profound statement that the best of creation, the last prophet of Islam, called a Black woman his mother. So that's something for you to keep in mind. And then of course, he married this Black woman to the boy that he raised like a foster son. Later on, he arranged the marriage between Ayman and Zayd ibn Haritha, and of course Zayd was Arab, so he married the Arab Sahabi to a Habashiyah female companion. And there's a number of these marriages that the Prophet ﷺ arranged between a Habashi, a Sahabi who was Habashi with an Arab, right? And of course, most people in our community, if somebody Black were to go up into the community and ask for someone's daughter, they'd be turned away, right? And I know this personally, and I've seen this, but that wasn't the case with the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ. It was different. So we we have an understanding of Islam that is very different from the Sahaba. Our understanding and practice of Islam is very different from the Sahaba. That's the reality. So read the book by Ibn al-Jawzi al-Hanbali, rahmatullah alayh. This is a very educational book. Tanwir Ghabish fi Fadli Sudan al-Habish.
Jazakallah khair. Beautiful response by Imam Dawood. I just wanted to point out, do we have, okay, I just wanted to make sure that person was muted. I'm sorry about that. Okay, inshallah, I want to move on maybe to possible questions we have from the audience. If Ahmad is here, anyone has any questions, inshallah. Let me see.
And while we're waiting for questions, I want to add to what Imam Dawood said, that the marriage of Zayd and Ayman brought forward a young man. His name is Usama bin Zayd. And Usama bin Zayd actually led the Muslim army in many battles. It's amazing of how Islam actually came to this point and worked through making sure that slavery would come extinct by rewarding those who free their slaves. At one point, Arabia was going to be free of slaves when this is adopted. And it's so crucial right now to really remember those figures and learn from the Sahaba and learn from Prophet ﷺ how there is no difference between an Arab and non-Arab except with God consciousness. And it's crucial to take that to consideration. Unfortunately, as he said, cultural racism is happening, and we need to acknowledge that. And that's the first step in order to achieve justice. And then to remove all of these barriers that are there, the system needs to be reorganized, redesigned in order to be equitable to everybody, that everybody has the same opportunities. And I want to mention also that representation really matters. Voting really matters. When you have people in office who are going to make those decisions, who are going to make those policies, people who have gone through these experiences are going to be the vehicles of change. And that's what we need to aspire for in a system that is broken, or say, designed to work for the other. You have to elect people who are from the communities. You have police officers who are living in those communities to be the police of those neighborhoods. You should not have a community being policed by people who live 50 miles, 40 million miles away. And unfortunately, that's in every city, even Dearborn. You look at it, the markup that does the police, does the elected officials represent the people who are living in those neighborhoods? And the answer is sadly not. And that's the importance of us needing to organize, needing to really come in forces and unity with other marginalized communities in order to achieve representation and to achieve justice.
Thank you so much for your input, Mr. Adil. We actually have members from the American Center for Justice who would like to give a message, kind of like a perspective from the youth. Intifada and Reem, are you guys there?
Yeah, they would have to unmute themselves. Yeah, wa alaikum
Yes.
salam.
Is Intifada there?
Intifada, you would have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Okay, inshallah, whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, so I mostly just wanted to talk about, like, for instance, when we go into the masjid, I realize a lot of times our, the minority brothers and sisters that come in don't feel welcomed. And it is on us to make them feel welcomed by just simply saying salam, by simply just, saying, how are you doing? Making them feel like this is also a place that they shouldn't feel judged in. The masjid is the last place where someone should feel judged or welcome. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up. And another thing too, it's not just trying to educate ourselves, but sometimes we also have to educate our parents as well, because unfortunately, a lot of people that come from different countries or, different backgrounds just see what they see on the media. The media doesn't really portray what's really out there, unfortunately. It tries to downgrade, minorities, and not just the Blacks, but also people like us, Muslims. So we should be very understanding of that as Muslims, as a minority, that people of color are not portrayed, positively on media. So a lot of times I can hear older people saying, Black people, they just do this and this and that, and they're not educated. They're gangs, they're violent. It's very unfortunate because, sometimes they don't allow you to have friends who are, of color, or even there are incidents where they won't let you, marry someone of color because of that background knowledge, that negative background knowledge that they get from the media, or they get from, just other people talking about it. And so it is on us, our generation, to teach them that they're not all like that. Just like how some people might view Muslims as terrorists, just because of what they see on media doesn't mean that that's what we are. So, try to have friends who are, of color, introduce them to your parents, talk to them about the history of Islam, and speak to them in ways where they're more understanding of the situation so they can be more accepting of it. But that's basically what I wanted to bring up from my end.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Reem. Yep, I agree as well. Tearing down stereotypes is very, very important.
Yeah.
Father, you're next, inshallah.
The main points I want to talk to the youth about is that as Americans, we need to understand that racism has always been a part of America. That being said, a crucial part is educating ourselves, because history has showed us how the Native Americans were treated in the past, slavery, to the Civil War, and then to Jim Crow, the post 9/11 era, and the influx of many immigrants from all over the world. Having a better understanding that racism can stem from these things is a key to understanding what is going on, because you can be biased towards a specific group of people, prejudiced towards someone you don't even know, or establishing a stereotype to a specific person based on their ethnicity. With that being said, it can lead to discrimination, and with those combined, it ends with racism. Understanding the current incidences that have happened these past couple of years against many minorities is a way of showing America has not really changed. Racism is still within our roots. We discriminate left and right because we are not educated enough to understand the seriousness of it. Sometimes we are not properly taught the wrongs of the past in America. As Muslim youth, we should understand the grievances faced when it comes to the oppression and brutality caused by racism. As a community that understands the struggles, we must become allies. So these are the things that can help you understand and talk about racism. As youth, we can teach ourselves by watching movies and documentaries, which can help us get a point of view of what it's like to be a minority in America. Reading a book about someone's experience can also help us know what someone's life was like dealing with racism. Reading articles can help us know what's going on and how people are being treated today. These help us understand the perspective of being a minority and helps others who are not aware of this as well. Understanding the unique perspectives and incidences that have happened to many people is very important, because that will help us grow as human beings. These incidences should be an eye-opener to many people, because racial incidents have been occurring regularly, and George Floyd's case is one of many. Although some people may not see it eye to eye, it still opens up different racial perspectives. For those who hear the voices of the oppressed will empathize with those who have faced racism. People of all colors are allies, and as allies, we can protest, sign petitions, donate to many organizations, help the family of those who have lost a son, daughter, husband, or wife to racism, support minority-owned businesses. We are allies. We stand up for each other, have each other's backs in these hard times. As a youth, we are the future. We must take these times and understand each other. Understand and see that no human should be judged by the color of their skin or religion. The struggle of being a minority in America is hard. No one should be afraid of a system that is meant to protect them. As Muslim youth, we should know that we must speak up against this, for we are the voices of the future. We can look at history to help us change the future. Connecting the awful things that have happened in the past will help us make sure we set a more clear future. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Intifada. Beautiful.
Yeah, beautifully said. Great job. And I'm really at awe and I'm really proud of the youth these days that they're challenging the status quo and they're educating their parents on the importance of acknowledging bias and acknowledging racism and correcting those issues. I've seen that happen in my own family and in the community, even prior to those unfortunate incidents. And I would say, Intifada and your friend, you guys are just amazing. So continue that work and continue on these paths to build a community that is equitable, that is just. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to always achieve justice, to always achieve equity, even if it's on us or on the parents or on the friends. You always are commanded to seek justice, and that's exactly what you're doing with your colleagues. So I commend you for that, and I hope that the youth would follow suit and be the educators, because our parents, our grandparents, they usually came from overseas with very minimal education, and they even came with their own mindset and with their own bias from Yemen. I think there is a question about the absence of laws or limits against racism in Islamic countries. And unfortunately, I've seen it firsthand in Yemen. There is the marginalized community of Black immigrants who come and they have their own concentration camps, and very few numbers of them make it and they go to schools and they get educated. And unfortunately, they're stuck in that cycle. And Yemenis live like they don't even exist. So hopefully that gets corrected. Obviously, Yemen has now blown lots of issues, but hopefully in the midst of these issues, that this issue of these marginalized communities needs to be corrected. And it's up to the youth and up to the new generation to really define these, because unfortunately the older generation, with all the due respect, did not correct these issues.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Adil. Okay, we have a few more minutes left, inshallah. I just wanted to go back through the speakers. Imam Dawood, do you have anything to promote for us? Any charities, organizations that you want to shine some light on for the audience?
Okay, well, for those of you who are in Michigan, there's an organization that's Black-led, and its director is an African-American Muslim. It's called Dream of Detroit. And I would urge you to support that organization. So it's working on community development and also helping people who are returning citizens, Muslims, in being acclimated back into society. And the director also works on issues relating to systemic racism, which includes police accountability. So the organization is called Dream of Detroit, and they've actually rehabbed a number of homes that are next to the Muslim Center, which is in Detroit. For those of you who don't know about the Muslim Center, it's off of the Lodge Freeway in West Davidson. It's not far away from Hamtramck. And that Jama'ah, like 95% of the people there are African-American or immigrants from Africa, like Gambia and Senegal. The resident sheikh is a graduate of Al-Azhar, and he is from a country called the Gambia, which most African Americans' ancestors come from the Gambia in West Africa. So this Dream of Detroit is one organization I strongly suggest that you think about. Two things. You can give monetary donations, but also they look for volunteers. Now, right now it's bad because COVID-19 hasn't lifted, but there's ways, and he takes youth from different places. I've seen over there before youth from the West Bloomfield community, from the Syrian community. I've seen Syrian youth there working on projects. I've also seen like Indian, Pakistani youth there. So maybe Yemeni youth could get involved if you're in Detroit area and Dearborn and go. The director's name is Brother Mark Crane. He's Muslim. His name is Mark. He's a convert to Islam. So alhamdulillah, they're doing some good things. They're also another organization that does some good work. And I love this brother. He's actually Philistini. He does work in the South Side of Chicago. His name is Dr. Rami Nashashibi. He runs an organization called IMAN, the Inner City Muslim Action Network. IMAN stands for Inner City Muslim Action Network. And they do a lot of work on trying to address some of the underlying issues that affect African Americans as it relates to anti-Black racism. I strongly suggest those two. And in particular, they're assisting Black brothers and sisters, but besides that, they're operating from the perspective of the Quran and Sunnah. And I think that's also very important that we lift up models that are prophetic and lift up models that are operating from the Islamic virtues and values, right? I think that's very important.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Dawood. I'll make sure that these two organizations I'll make sure that our organization exposes these organizations to our audience, inshallah, for sure. Thank you so much. Dr. Khalid, do you have any organizations, charities?
Yeah, I just want to add that in New York City, let's not forget about the Black pioneers that struggles here in New York City. For example, in Brooklyn, the oldest mosque in New York City was founded by Dawood. Dawood was a Black imam in Brooklyn. He actually donated the building to become a masjid, and it still exists today. As of Adil mentioned something very important, which is election. Politicians really pay attention to voters, and they look at the record of who votes. We should be out there voting, regardless of who we vote for, but we need to be in the book, that we do make decisions, that we are proactive, not reactive community. The third thing, start small. We should invite a Black family to our house, communicate with them, have a small dialogue, listen to them, and let them listen. And we at the same time have to talk to them, tell them our opinion on what they should do and how we should continue our dialogue in a very small scale. It doesn't have to be big. It's one family, two family, once, twice, 3 times a year. It will make a difference. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khalid. Brother Adil, do you have anything to promote?
Sure. I want to mention the Muslim Center of Detroit. They've been doing amazing things over the years, and every Saturday, this is prior to COVID, they were doing lunch Saturdays with support groups for those who can't afford lunch, and going there and having those conversations with our Black Muslims and sisters and brothers was just amazing, eye-opening. So you go to MuslimCenterDetroit.com to volunteer or to also donate and support that masjid, which is very close to our community near Hamtramck. So I hope that if we take something from today, obviously is to correct the bias and to eradicate that word that I mentioned, that we never use it again with our families, with our friends, in our conversations, and we hold everybody to a high regard, and we only judge folks based on their character and based on their on what they how they carry themselves, rather than their skin of their color or the religion or the beliefs that they hold. So I thank the American Center for Justice for this important conversation that we need to always have. And I commend Dr. Khalid and Imam Walid for joining us today. That was a great conversation and great insights into those very important things in history that we need to acknowledge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adil. And thank you all for who attended. I want us to appreciate the time that we have with our speakers. Alhamdulillah, it was a very good learning experience. And if anyone has any last remarks they want to make, any of the speakers, inshallah. No. All right, thank you guys. Thank you everyone who attended. Jazakallah khair. And I think we'll wrap up with that.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Assalamu
alaikum.